We never can't not do nothing, and today we'll be explaining how to buy a second-hand bicycle. First, a few disclaimers. First one, in this video I will make it a bit perhaps long and tedious, and in order to help the viewers I will create chapters that you can see in the timeline and also in the video description, so you can just click and skip to the part that is of interest to you. Secondly, this video is aimed towards novices, people who are not very experienced, so I will give advice assuming that whoever is using it is not very mechanically skilled and cannot always tell between a complicated malfunction and a simple one that can be easily and cheaply fixed. And related to that, the third disclaimer is that I'm explaining things that have worked for me and for my friends if they and when they ask for my advice. So even though many things can be fixed, when people sell second-hand bicycles, I often hear them say, like, when I find some malfunction, like, that's an easy fix, it's cheap to fix, I just didn't have the time. And often that is not the case. I can often tell that right away, but even if a bicycle is bought in spite of my advice or otherwise, it often turns out that the malfunction that was advertised as a simple one and easy to fix is not really that simple. So in my opinion, if there is a problem on a bicycle that's easy and cheap to fix, the seller should have fixed it easily and cheaply on their own before advertising and selling a bicycle. And now let's begin. First thing, when people are looking for second-hand bicycles, they are trying to save money. And about the saving costs, yes, bicycles are not like cars, not even like motorcycles. Everything is visible, there's no plating hiding anything, and the engine is used, so you don't have to worry about the state of the engine, and most other parts are relatively cheap to replace, especially for bicycles that are not using some newer technology and do not have some high-end equipment. For high-end equipment bikes, everything is a lot more expensive, so if you have a worn cassette that is 11 speed and a worn chain that is 11 speed, that will cost 3 to 5 times more than some bicycles with fewer speeds, like 8-speed chains and cassettes. So that thing differs. It's like you see a worn chain, it's the same problem, but it differs whether a bicycle is 11 speed or 12 speed one or 7 or 8 speed. So the prices differ, and you can also check for the prices of spare parts or worn parts when you're considering buying a bicycle. So when you look at it and you see something needs replacing, you know how much it will cost you, and then you can weigh whether it's a good option to buy or it will turn out to be more expensive or almost as expensive as a new bicycle. So that's for saving costs, and in the long run, if a bicycle is if a bicycle is not stolen, it often pays to buy a new bicycle, because you can just maintain it and it runs. And bicycles that are second-hand, if they are in poor condition, they might require a lot of investment right away. And okay, that's about the prices. Now about looking at second-hand bicycles, people usually go to, I don't know, Craigslist or other places where bikes are advertised, and you can use narrowing options to find the search for the type of bicycle that you wish to buy. I will put a link on my website where I have made an article, like sort of a test, which bicycle suits my needs. So you can just fill in a questionnaire and see, based on your intent and use case, what type of bicycle you should be looking for. Like, is it a road bike or a trekking bike like this one or something else? And once you find the bicycles of interest to you, you will usually use a phone to call the seller or contact them. And when you're doing that, again, this is my advice and experience, state the bicycle you are interested in, and like this one, it says Farad Manufaktur, that's the manufacturer, and you can say I'm asking about the black Farad Manufaktur bicycle, the trekking one. You stated it at 500 euros, so that it is right from the start determined which bicycle you are talking about, because some people sell more than one bicycles, some people deal with selling second-hand bicycles, so you want to avoid any kind of misunderstanding. You ask about bicycle you're interested in, and they are giving you the answers about some other bicycle they are also selling. Many people make that mistake, and it creates confusion and sometimes disappointment. Secondly, what I always do, I consider myself an experienced mechanic, and when I come to the place I will notice any problems usually, but it saves time often to ask, is there something broken on that bicycle? Does something need fixing? And the sellers usually, at least in my country, always say just sit and ride, it's top condition, no matter what the condition is. Most often you will get that answer, but it's worth asking anyhow. After that, if you get after you get the answer, you should rephrase the question and ask it again, because again, in my experience, when people are trying to lie or deceive, they don't give straight answers if you ask them a few times. So I would ask after that, the first question is anything broken on the bicycle. I will say, is there anything worn on the bicycle that needs replacing? And hear the answer. If you're satisfied with what you hear, you can arrange to see the bicycle. If you're not, you look on. I will get back to this a bit later in a minute, but now when you're arranging to see the bicycle, you should pick a time when there is daylight, so that you can see any flaws or problems, because even very good lighting like I have in my garage does not always allow you to easily see any problems. You should make sure to look at it in broad daylight when it's bright. And when you come to see the bicycle, people have their shops or stores or at their place. You will get the first impression of the bicycle when you come and see it, and the first impression of the seller and the place where the bicycle is stored. And this part relates to the previous part about speaking on the phone. If you have any feeling that something is wrong, something is off, just thank them for their time and look further, because often our gut feeling is something that gives us information that is important and should not be disregarded, even if we at the time cannot put our finger on what exactly is that we found to be a bit suspicious. So always listen to your gut feeling, and if you have any doubt, it's safer to err on the side of safety, of caution, and just look on. Also related to that, when you're buying, many sellers use tricks to try to make you buy something, like to make you feel like you're obliged. You're not obliged to buy. If you wish to look further, you should be allowed to do so. If they are pushy or try to here, have some coffee or something and do you some sort of small favor, and then you feel embarrassed, you shouldn't, because anyone who is honest and fair will not insist on you buying a bicycle. They should be okay, look, whatever bicycle others you want to look, if this is the right bike, you'll come and buy it. And another trick that people use is to I have already a buyer for this one, if you don't buy it right away, it will be sold. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's just trying to urge you to buy it. The same goes for new bicycles. Similar techniques are often used, so beware of that. Just be relaxed and you will find your bicycle. Be patient. So at the same time, if the price is a bit higher but you find the bicycle to be in really good quality and condition, it's practically not an issue if you pay $50 or even $100 more and you end up riding bicycle for a decade or more. It's worth it. There's no need to look for the cheapest possible option and miss perhaps a bicycle that's in very good condition, very well maintained. That's enough talking. I hope I didn't bore you and I hope you find this useful. Now we will move the camera to show the bicycle, because you don't need to be looking at me for this part, and I'll go over it, how I would examine this bicycle if I were buying it, and give you anything, all the tips that I think are important. So let's move the camera and get on with this. When you arrive at the place, there's a dilemma whether you should first do a test ride or inspect the bicycle, because if you do a test ride and the bicycle is not fitting you and you don't feel comfortable on it and it doesn't feel right, you will have wasted time if you had examined it first. However, I think it's better to spend the 10 minutes needed to look over the bicycle before doing a test ride for several reasons. First, safety. If the brakes are not working properly or there's some problem with the frame or the wheels, you might get even injured or fall down. Secondly, just as important, if anything breaks while you're doing a test ride, you're in a difficult situation. Is it your fault? Did you break it? You have to buy it. And it can get very unpleasant, and it's best avoided. So I advise to first spend the time to examine the bicycle before taking it on a ride. Many sellers, at least in my city, will, when you arrive, like, take it for a ride, see how good it goes, but I never do that. I'll just first take a look at it. Give me a few minutes, and they should. If they are pushy or something, it's again a red flag. So that's the first thing, to look over a bicycle, and here I'll show how to do it before a test ride. I usually start with the frame, because frame is both the spine and the heart of a bicycle, to put it like that. And if there's something wrong with the frame, it's very expensive to source a new frame or second hand that is in good condition, then put all the parts on the other frame. Sometimes not all the parts will fit, because there are many different standards and types of equipment. So if there's anything wrong with the frame, you should not buy a bicycle. How to inspect the frame? It's important to be with good lighting, preferably at daylight, and the first thing I do is look over all the tubes. I'm inspecting them for any cracks or dents. Even a small dent in a tube makes it lose its structural strength, and it's generally not considered safe to ride. Again, this is intended for novices. Experts will be able to judge how bad it is, whether it can be repaired and so on, but it's safer to look for, there are many bicycles and many have frames in good condition. And the way to inspect a frame for dents or cracks is first by looking at it from all sides, going around it, looking at every tube, from this seat stays, then top tube, the down tube, look at the fork, inspect it with patience, take your time, look at both sides, then look from below. Yeah, you can get dirty even and looking down, but it's safer. And you're looking for any sort of like cracks that look like a hairline. They're very thin, almost like some sort of a scratch, but if you pay closely attention, you can see whether it's just a scratch or there's a crack in the material. You can look if it's a carbon fiber frame for any defects on the paint job, because with carbon fiber bikes that can be a sign of the lamination of the carbon fibers, and that results in a crack later on. So in that case, it's best to either take the frame for a professional inspection or to look for other bicycles. And another thing is with metal bicycles, aluminum, steel, titanium or whatever, is look at the welds where the tubes are put together. It's done using brazing on steel frames and using welding on aluminum frames usually. And there you can also see any sort of imperfections or cracks. I will move the bicycle now closer to take a look at these welds. These are okay. Here you can see like it has some sort of small bulges. That's okay. That's nothing to worry about. This is a good weld generally, and not all the welds are polished. Even I'd say that it's a stronger bond when it's not polished and the ground to be like even and nice flat. This is perfectly fine. but I don't want to see any sort of cracking or problems with it. That's important. Make sure to check the welds in all places. Bottom bracket is a bit often dirty, so you can perhaps bring some cloth or paper tissue and wipe off any sort of dirt or grease or mud and inspect the bottom bracket welds. Here, it's these parts. Make sure to inspect it and check it. Okay, after you've done that and made sure that the frame is in good condition, the next thing that I look at are the wheels. I want to see if there's any play in the bearings, because that usually means that the bearings are worn. And here let's use the front wheel. To do that, the bicycle is on the ground and I'm just rocking this side to side, and when there's play in the bearings, it's like small like a seesaw. I don't know how to explain it, but you will hear it like move from one side and hit like sort of a stop. Then when you move back, it also moves a bit, then hits a stop. This one does not move. It gives me resistance whichever way I do. There's no any loose play, so this is good. I will do the same for the rear wheel. And if the wheels are okay, if the bearings are okay, you can also try to spin the wheel and see if it turns freely, just in case. The safest way to check the wheel bearings is to remove the wheel completely and turn the bearing by hand to see if it's moving roughly. But I don't think that's very practical to do for novices. This test usually is as good as it gets to do it simply. But I will show this anyway in case it helps anyone. Here we have a wheel that's taken out, and I can just spin this and see if it moves smoothly or there's any scratching or binding, because when the wheel is in the bicycle, this is very heavy, and when I turn it, I cannot feel it on the bicycle. But when I turn this part with hand, it's a lot smaller lever than moving this. I can notice and sense all that. Also, important thing for quick release hubs is that they should have play once the wheel is taken out. Then you should feel play. Here, this one has it. I'm trying to catch it on camera. Not sure if it's visible. I'm moving it up and down. And that's because quick release makes the bearings a bit tighter once it is locked, and creates a bit more preload, which eliminates the play. But if the bearing is configured and the preload is set so that it has no play when the wheel is out, that means when you put the wheel into the bicycle and tighten this, the preload will be too high and the bearings will get worn and damaged very quickly. So this is like an advanced explanation, but maybe some people will make use of it. After having inspected the bearings, the next thing is the spokes. For spoke inspection, it's best to have someone holding a bicycle in place, unless the bicycle has a kickstand like this one. And it's best to start with the valve and do the whole circle. And what I usually do is take two pairs of spokes that are like in parallel and just push them one towards the other and see if they are too loose or too tight, or if spokes on the same side, like here we have the one hand side spokes and further away are the ones that come from the opposite side of the hub. Spokes on the same side should have equal tension among each other. If one is a lot tighter than the other one, that means that the wheel is not very properly trued and you might see some spokes breaking or some problems. So the thing you can do is like push all the parallel running spokes towards each other and see. This looks fairly uniform. This spoke is a bit more loose than the others, but it doesn't seem very critical. It's not a huge difference. Here, this spoke is bent. This has hit something, but it's not loose, and I would consider it okay for a front wheel, especially with a lot of spokes like this one is, like 32 or 36 spokes. Not sure, have to count it. Okay, After you that, you can inspect the elbows of the spokes. If there are any small cracks, inspect it closely, because that is where they usually crack. Also, inspect the rim. Make a whole turn around the rim and look for any cracks on the interface of nipples into the rim, because rims usually crack like small hairline cracks near these parts. If it's a rim brake bicycle, you should also inspect the rim brake surfaces. If they have any sort of like a worn, like it's sort of convex inside, so you can move your finger and feel it like slip into a nice round channel. That means the brake area is worn and the rims will need replacing in order not to blow out from the tire pressure when they lose too much material. Some rims have marks for the wear, like this one. Here is like sort of a mark. So when this is worn flat, the rim is due for replacement, but not all have this. So you can just feel by hand if it's like have some sort of indent. Okay, final thing when testing for wheels and spokes is to see if any spokes will crack. For this, it's best to use some sort of gloves. Yes, it may sound ridiculous, but you can injure yourself when you pull spokes strongly like this, which is needed in order to inspect the spokes, whether they will break. Good quality spokes cannot break when you use this, no matter how strong you are. When you push adjacent spokes close to each other, pull them. If spokes break from this, they are not good. Don't let the seller tell you that you've broken it. Those spokes were already worn and damaged. And since it's on a wheel with a tire, no spoke can, if they break, fly out and injure anyone. They will just make a ping and stay in place, more or less. But when you exert a lot of force like this, your tendons can get injured from too much force, and it's advisory to use good gloves to spread the load. Here, don't try this at home. I'm using just my hands here. This is what should be done around the whole wheel. And if that's all okay, the last thing to do is to check if the wheel is trued. Does it have any movement right or left? That's also a sign of some sort of problem. Either the rim is bent to a side, or the spokes are not trued properly, and that it all takes time and money to fix, and sometimes it cannot be very cheap if the rim is problematic. And that finishes the wheel inspection. The second part is related to the brakes. But before checking the brakes, I like to check all the bearings. First thing I check is the fork bearing. I try to move fork back and forth and hold my finger at the interface between the bearing and the steerer tube to see if it moves, if there's any sort of movement or play. You can also, if the bicycle does not have front suspension, bounce the front wheel and you will hear it clicking if there's any play in the bearing. And you can also lift the bicycle up and rock the front wheel. It should rock like this a few times. If it just moves to one place and then stops, that means the bearing, even if it has no play, is worn and is not moving freely. Same goes for the rear wheel. If there's suspension, you should check if rear suspension has a lot of play, if the bushings are worn, so it moves too much. This bicycle does not have it, so I cannot demonstrate it. That goes for this bearing, and the second bearing to check is the bottom bracket. And to check that, I will move the pedals, the cranks away and towards me, and see if there's any play in the bearing. I'm looking for any play in this, like in the axle, bottom bearing. This one is good. There's no rocking. And if that's okay, the next thing to check should be, at least for me, brakes. I want to see if there's any rubbing of the brakes and if they work properly. Sorry, I forgot to mention one more, like a trick for inspecting front wheel, steer bearings. You can hold the front wheel locked and rock the bicycle back and forth, and hold your finger to see if there's any movement between the bearing and the steer tube. This looks good. This is okay. Okay, now to inspect the brakes, I want to see if there's any rubbing. I'm slowly pushing the brake lever, and I want it to engage nicely and evenly. Okay, it looks good. Okay, this will be further tested on a test ride, but for the in place testing is a good method. Same goes for the rear wheel. I will spin it and see. Okay, it looks more or less okay. It stops, and there's a nice even travel of the brake, no binding or anything like that. And it doesn't move all the way to the bars. So the hydraulic system in this case is in good condition. And you can check also the brake pads for any wear, and that is done by looking at them. It will be hard to catch on the camera, but you want to see if it's these brake pads to have a lot of meat, at least 100 or at least 1 millimeter of this brake material before the steel. And for rim brakes, you can inspect them also to see how much material is, are they evenly worn or some problems, and this one is cracked. I'm not sure if it can be seen on camera, but it's cracked, it's not good. Brake pads are a minor problem, they can be replaced, but uneven brake pad wear, if one pad is worn a lot more than the other, can mean that there's something wrong with the brake, and for people who are not experienced, it's best to look for other bicycles. I'll put a link on my video to explain how to fix a binding hydraulic disc brake calipers. And so we've checked the frame, we've checked all the important bearings, and we've checked the brakes. Next thing that I would do is to check the handlebars and everything else on the bicycle. Is it firmly attached? It can sometimes be solved if there's any play or wiggle by tightening bolts, but it can also be a sign of bolts that are worn, that have threads ripped or some other problem, or stuck so they cannot be adjusted. So if you don't bring any tools for tightening, then it's best to avoid the bicycle. If you have, then you can try tightening it and moving it and see if it will help. So is this handlebar seated securely? Are these shift and brake levers in place? What about the rear rack? Yeah, it looks okay. No, here, see, here this has some play. This is not tightened properly, and it will probably be solved by tightening, but if you cannot check it on the spot, it's best to avoid. Maybe there's some damage in the threads. Mud guards, they can usually be bent out of place. Just check if they are somewhere broken or damaged. These ones are not aligned properly. This one is a lot closer on this side than on the other side, but this looks like something that can be fixed relatively easily. However, if you're not sure, or if it looks problematic, it's best to look further on, or have the seller fix it before selling it. This one is also not aligned properly. It could be that the whole wheel is moved to one side because it's not dished properly, because it's the rear wheel, but I'm looking at the frame to see, yeah, this looks like to be the case. This wheel is a bit more to the left side of the bicycle. It's probably not dished properly. I'll check if it's seated all the way into the dropouts. Okay, now it's seated properly. Yeah, a lot more room from the right hand side chainstay to the wheel than from the left hand side chainstay to the wheel. So, okay, we've checked the frame, we've checked the bearings, we've checked the brakes, we've checked all the other parts mounted on the bicycle, and now we need to inspect the drivetrain. Is it worn? Will it need replacing? So any drivetrain wear problems should not be a red flag, but it's something to be added into calculation whether a bicycle is worth buying or it's too expensive when you add the cost of replacing those. Because when a chain is worn, it requires usually a new cassette as well. When replaced, they go in pairs, to put it simply. And how I do that to test is, this is the simplest method. I pull the bike up, shift into the largest front chainring and into the smallest rear chainring. After having done that, I will try to pull the chain off the front chainring. If I can pull it off so much that I can see the whole tooth where I pull it off, I go at like 3 o'clock when I look from the right hand side. It's like 9 o'clock here. I'm trying to pull it off from the chainring, and here it does not show the whole tooth. If I can see the whole tooth, I can know that the chain is worn and that the cassette will need replacing as well. This drivetrain looks okay, except that the chain is completely dry. It needs lubrication, but for some reason it probably wasn't ridden a lot, so it's not worn. And then I would visually inspect chain to see if it has any cracks, any bent how to say it, links, any bent damaged links. I will slowly turn this and inspect around the whole chain. And finally, the gears. Do the gears work well? I'll try shifting here. The rear shifter does not work properly. It's a bit slow and it won't shift to the smallest gear. Problems with shifting can be because of poor tuning or because the rear derailleur hanger on the frame is bent, damaged, or because the derailleur is damaged and it has too much play. This derailleur looks okay. This is decent, but it could be either that the hanger is bent or that the tuning is not right. So I'll look at the hanger to see if it's parallel, if the chain, this cage stays like vertical when the bicycle is vertical, and when the chain is not put too much cross-chained. It looks more or less okay, but that's one problem that I've noticed. And now let's try to shift to see the front shifting. Okay, I'll shift the rear a bit. Okay, front shifting looks okay, the rear shifter is problematic, and it would be my advice, if you're not too experienced, to avoid bicycles with shifting problems, because if it's simple to fix and tune, I'll make a video about tuning derailleurs. It's an easy fix and sellers should be able to fix it. If it's not fixed, there's probably either bent derailleur cage or some other problem. So finally, you can check the pedals for any play. These bearings are worn. There's a lot of play in the pedals, but pedals can be replaced relatively easily, relatively cheaply. And inspect also the saddle for any cracks, handlebars, and those are minor details that should be calculated as an extra cost for replacing, but not something to give up a bicycle because they are what they are. A seat costs what a saddle costs, what it costs, and that's it. Just calculate that price. It will not affect any other problems, unlike some other things that I've mentioned here. And finally, this bicycle has lighting installed, with the Dynamo hub, so I want to check if it works. Dynamo hubs are super practical things for using bicycles for commuting or any other use, and you don't have to worry about batteries or taking them off the bicycle because they are usually bolted, and at least in my city this does not get stolen. Still, they will steal a wheel or the whole bicycle, but they won't unscrew these and take it off, so it's more practical than using the electric stuff that can be easily dismounted, the battery run stuff. So let's see if this works. I've turned it on. Okay, front light works. The rear light, if you cannot see it, you can lean the bicycle next to some sort of wall, and the rear light should shed some light on the wall so you can see it, if you don't have a friend to take a look. Okay, as far as I'm concerned, this bicycle would have been ready for a test ride if the rear shifting were okay, but since it is not, I would ask the seller to check it or bring a more experienced mechanic friend to see if it can be tuned on the spot or if it's something to worry about, and to try and assess the amount of damage. The problem you might face with the derailleur hangers, they are made usually of aluminium to bend and crack before anything else gets damaged on a frame in case of a drop or something. So they would preserve both the rear derailleur and the frame from getting any damage. However, every bicycle, even from the same manufacturer, every model has a different model of hanger, and they are often difficult to source. You can find some machinists to make one for you using a sort of like source from the original, or you can try to source from the manufacturer extra frame hangers, and when you buy them, buy two right away. But any sort of misalignment on the rear derailleur hanger, especially on bicycles that have 9 or more speeds at the back, will cause poor shifting, and will be very difficult to make it shift properly. And even the slightest misalignment that is not noticeable using naked eye, that requires special tools to check the rear derailleur alignment, rear derailleur hanger alignment, even only using those tools can you check and see if it's all the way parallel or bent to some direction, and those tools can be used to straighten it. However, since it is made of aluminium and it is designed to break before anything else breaks off, straightening it can cause some micro cracking in the material, and so it later during your riding can break off and get into the spokes and cause the damage to the rear wheel, to the rear derailleur, and perhaps to the frame. So this is not meant to scare you, but to just give you the idea of what kind of problems you can run into, and why I think it's safer to err on the side of caution. I have straightened rear derailleur hangers on my bicycles and rode them for years afterwards, but using very close inspection and checking, especially in the first weeks and months, to see if there are any cracks developing or any kinds of problems. And I think this about sums up the inspection part. Finally, you are left with a test ride. I will now move the camera so you can see my beautiful face and talk a bit about the test ride. Yes, very wonderful. Now to talk about the test ride. When you are taking your bicycle after inspecting it to do the final check, test ride, always do that, never miss to do that. Some sellers don't like allowing that for whatever reason, like you will get it dirty or you might get a puncture, which is possible. So that's why I recommend testing the bicycle in place, checking it thoroughly before taking it for a test ride, because that's like the final stage. You just want to be sure it's the right fit for you, and even if you get a puncture, you'll find some way of compensating the seller, but make sure that everything else is okay. Now for the test ride, you will take it, try to ride it slowly, somewhere where there's not much traffic if possible, and test the brakes, how they perform when you are riding a bicycle, because they can look good on the stand or in place, but lack braking power when you're riding it. So test them independently of each other. First the rear brake, then the front brake. Braking first with less force to make sure it's braking okay, and if you see it's braking okay, then try a bit harder braking to see how they perform. Do they squeal, which means replacing brake pads, not too great a problem. Is there any shudder or any problems, and do they brake properly? If they don't, it could be a minor problem, or it could mean that you need to replace discs or brake pads, or even brake calipers, or even brake levers for hydraulic systems, and so on. Maybe the housing is leaking somewhere or cracked if it's for mechanical brakes and so on. So again, a reason to avoid a bicycle if you're not too experienced to judge what it costs to repair it and then take that into calculation. So first thing to test is brakes. After that, if the brakes are okay, then you can ride more quickly, more fastly, and run through all the gears, see how it shifts when under load, when you're not shifting under load, but when you're riding. And if you're satisfied with that, to make sure that the frame is aligned, in addition to visually inspecting it for any cracks and asymmetry or any dents, is anything move out of the way, you will let go of the handlebars. I hope you're capable of riding a bicycle with no hands on the bars. If you're not, find a friend who is. It's a perfectly safe, normal way to ride a bicycle, in spite of what many people say, some people. And when you let go of the handlebars, if the bicycle leans to one side or to the other, especially if it does so always to the same side, there's some problem with the frame or with wheels alignment, or both. And if it only leans randomly to one side or the other, it might mean that there's some problem in the headset bearing. Either way, I think if it's not handling properly when riding, and when riding with no hands, it's best to avoid it and look for other bicycles. After you've done all these boring, tedious parts, if you made it so far through this video, there's the final thing, like you see how the bike feels when you ride it. Does it feel okay? Is this the bike that you wish to ride, that you enjoy riding? If it's not, perhaps it's best to look for other bicycles. And I will link in this video's description a series of articles that I wrote about bicycle saddles. Many people who get into cycling look for saddles that are too soft, because normal saddles are uncomfortable to them. Then, after they get some miles on a bicycle, the soft saddle they had bought is uncomfortable, so they go with more firm saddles, often even narrower. And that's another topic that I think you should look into. But having saddle discomfort does not mean always that the bicycle is not the right fit for you. Also, if you have some discomfort on the bars and positioning on the bicycle, it might mean that you just need to fit it properly, to set the saddle height to suit you. And I will link to an article explaining that, and to a video that I made that mentioned also that, along with bicycle frame geometry. It's not rocket science, and I know this video is probably very long, right, as it is, but I think it's worth mentioning that that's the tricky part, that when you're test riding a bicycle, sometimes it might not feel properly fitting, but you just need to lower the saddle a bit or put it a bit higher and it will be okay. So it's maybe not a bad idea to have some basic tools like Allen wrenches, usually for saddle adjustment. If it doesn't have a quick release, it's usually 4, 5 or sometimes 6 millimeter Allen wrench to loosen this bolt and set the saddle to be of the appropriate height, and then give it a proper test ride and see if it's good for you. And finally, to conclude, second-hand bicycles are a good option. They can be a good option, especially for people who commute and leave their bicycles unlocked. If it's old looking, bad but in good mechanical condition, it's a perfect combination, because it's not a thief magnet, and it can get you where you need to be. And for other stuff like getting bicycles just for exercising that will not be left out unlocked anywhere, it is my personal opinion that buying a new bicycle is cheaper in the long run. Yes, many people in my country especially buy second-hand bicycles and will say like when you take it out of the shop you've already lost 40% of its resale value and so on, but if you buy a bicycle that fits you and that you will enjoy riding for years, I think it's safer to have everything new than just maintain it and keep riding it, but with a note that only if you are sure what kind of bicycle you like and what kind of riding you actually do, because people often plan like I will go on weekend rides in the mountains and then they end up riding on the roads only. So for the unexperienced ones, it's perhaps better to first buy a cheaper bike, second-hand one, see what you actually do, what you actually enjoy, what kind of bicycle you like. With the second-hand bike you usually will not lose too much money when you resell it afterwards if it's not fitting, so it's not extremely risky as long as there are not many very expensive problems, defects with it. If you inspect it, if it's in good mechanical condition, then even if you find, okay, this is not really good for me, you can sell it and lose perhaps a little bit of money, but not too much, and then using that experience look for what you lacked in the previous bicycle to find something that's more convenient to you. For example, I like bicycles that have rear racks that can be mounted because I always haul some stuff and I don't like hauling it on my back. I also like mudguards for commuting and any sort of using bicycle for transport, because otherwise when you run over any wet area you get sprayed and you need to replace your clothes and wash them. While for recreational cycling, when I just sit on a bicycle to just go for a ride or sports and things like that, mudguards are not that crucial, and the bicycle does not need to have mudguard mounts. And so I hope this video helps you. I hope I've explained everything and it was not too tedious, at least for those who are buying bicycles. I hope it will be useful. We'll add all the links that are on my website, related articles. So if you put in the time to get to know more, it might help you. Hope it will not confuse you even more. And that's it. Thank you for watching. Cheers.